Story Cube, a special true crime episode, we're diving into the legend of 36 Quai des Orfèvres. For those who don't know, it's the headquarters of the Parisian Judicial Police, the heart of crime in France for over a century, where the country's biggest criminal cases have been solved. A legendary address, a place that has seen France's worst monsters pass through. Tonight, we're welcoming two men who know every corner, every case file, every secret of this temple. Charles Diaz, former head of the 36th Chief of Staff of the Judicial Police and number 2 of the National Anti-Terrorism Division. Claude Quai, Regional Director of the Paris Judicial Police, Section Chief at the 36. Together, they have opened the archives, the classified files, the photos never shown before. 1889, the Quai case, a body in a trunk, the birth of forensic police. 1890, Ravachol, bombs exploding in Paris, the first anarchist terrorist. 1891, the Bonneau gang, the first car robbers, shootouts in the middle of the street. 1892, the President of the Republic was assassinated, Paul Doumet killed in the heart of Paris. 1893. The liberation begins here. In the corridors of the 36,200 police officers died to free the city. From anarchists to serial killers, from holdups to attacks, from kidnappings to the most sordid crimes. Everything converged on this address, 36 Quai des Orfèvres. Tonight, Charles Diaz and Claude Quai open the doors of the temple. Make yourself comfortable, turn off the lights, and get ready to dive into the crime archives. Welcome to Story Cube, special 36 Quai des Orfèvres.
Everything was used, torture, everything you can imagine that's worse, that's it. And then so he's gonna cut pieces of her body, put them in his fridge and eat them. Some of them didn't hesitate to set up schemes against politicians. They made people believe that a politician was involved in pedophilia, but it was completely false. It was a setup.
Before we continue, I absolutely need to tell you about something. Do you have a phone? Good. Because Free Cash, the sponsor of this video, is going to explain how it can help you earn money without doing anything. Actually, Free Cash is a platform that pays you for very simple actions. Playing a mobile game, answering surveys between subway rides, testing a new app, basically things you do anyway, but here, you actually get paid for it. Actually, it's simple. Game developers need people to test their games before they release them. App developers need people to download and try their apps before they can launch them to the general public. Some companies pay for market research through surveys and give you part of the cash directly for participating in these studies or tests. With each completed task, you earn real money. Not gift cards or mysterious things, no, it's really your money that you can use. Then, you can withdraw the money through PayPal, simply in crypto or as a gift card. And in terms of trust, let me remind you that Free Cash is rated 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot. They have just over 240,000 reviews. Alright, so by using my link in the description, just know that you already get €5 for free just for signing up. It's honestly the easiest €5 you'll ever get in your life. Click the link and sign up to get €5 free. It only takes 2 clicks on the app and costs nothing. Now you have no excuse. You're getting paid to use your phone. Let's get back to the case. Hello everyone, today on StoryTube we welcome Claude Quai and Charles Diaz. So, these two extremely important personalities, as you saw in the introduction, thought it would be really interesting to talk a bit about their backgrounds, about the book they recently wrote, and to revisit some of the cases they discuss in the book. Claude and Charles, welcome to StoryTube. How are you doing? Everything is going perfectly well so far. It's true that before we start, I thought it was relevant that you wrote a book called The History of the 36 Quai des Orfèvres. I thought it might be a good idea to first explain to people what exactly the 36 Quai des Orfèvres is.
For more than a century, the 36 Quai des Orfèvres was first the headquarters of the Paris Sûreté and then of the Paris Judicial Police. So in fact, that's where all the most important investigative departments in Paris were located. So for several decades, it started in the 19th century, until they moved to the 17th arrondissement in 2017, because now the 36, which is des Orfèvres, is located at 36 Rue du Bastion, next to Porte de Clichy in Paris.
So, in the end, it was kind of like the headquarters where all the judicial police operations and so on took place.
All the big cases, I mean, the stairs of 36, the famous stairs of 36 were climbed by people like Dr. Petiot, like Violette Nozière, like Landru, who not as a killer but as a swindler, etc. All the most famous people, François Mitterrand also climbed them after the observatory attack. Yes, that's true. And so many very well-known people have climbed these stairs marked Staircase A, direction of the Judicial Police.
I think that both of you have been major players also at 36 Quai des Orfèvres, but in the end, what did you actually do?
I climbed those 148 steps for 35 years, often described by Maigret in his novels. I started out as a young inspector in 1963 on Alamodane Street. So in 93, I found myself in charge of a department where there were more than 3,100 cops.
Exceptional. And you? I grew up in Lorraine. I came to Paris at 17, hitchhiking to Paris. I enrolled at the Panthéon-Sorbonne University, thanks to the kindness of a young woman who was in line in front of me and who made a fake certificate for me. When you're young, you dare to do things, that's it. And so I studied law, and then I took the inspector exam. Why? Because my goal since I was 16, since I read the Maigret novels, since I also read other books, especially American detective novels, it's to be in the Paris Criminal Brigade. That's how it is. So I take the exam, I pass, I go to inspector school, and then I work in a police station and in the territorial brigade for a year and a half. And then I was lucky enough to be noticed by the criminal brigade, recruited in 1980. And so in 1980, when I was 23 years old when I think about it, I find myself as number 6. In the criminal brigade, we were ranked by seniority and by the importance of what we had to do. And then the first investigation I worked on was the murder of the stage manager of Coluche, then the case that made a lot of noise because it was Coluche.
For those who don't necessarily know about the case,
It's November 1980 in Gournay-sur-Marne, in the Paris suburbs. In an abandoned quarry, the naked body of a man is found, 2 bullets in the back of the neck. His name was René Gorfin. He was 37 years old, and he had been Coluche's lighting manager for over 7 years. He was a trusted man, a right-hand man, and the go-to guy for the most popular comedian in France. But René Gorlin is not just anyone, and above all, this is not just any moment. Coluche has just announced his candidacy for the presidential election, and polls show he has 16% of voting intentions. He is causing a stir, making people uncomfortable, and now his manager has been found murdered. It's a straightforward execution, so naturally questions arise. Is this a political warning? Was Coluche the target through his trusted man, or has René Gorlin's troubled past, a petty crook turned manager, finally caught up with him? The case is going to poison the presidential campaign, even fueling conspiracy theories.
So, a body is discovered in the sandpits at Gournay-sur-Marne, a naked body killed by a bullet to the head. The first thing you do in a case like this is try to identify the victim. All right, and thanks to his fingerprints, they identify a man named René Gorlin, who is known to the police for, well, minor offenses a long time ago, and except that when they ask his family, they discover that he is the manager of Coluche, meaning the person who organizes the logistics for his shows at the theater, the gymnasium, and elsewhere. And the problem is, at that time, Coluche is a candidate for the presidential election, or at least he announces that he will be. And so immediately it takes on a huge political dimension, and Coluche himself is frightened by what is being said. And what if I was the target? And what if it was a warning? So the investigation, we weren't being poisoned, but by the media, because they wanted to know everything, who we were hearing from, who our suspects were, and we weren't saying anything. It was complete silence, and he didn't like that, so we got all kinds of nonsense. Then, afterwards, Coluche gave up his idea of being a candidate, and we were able to continue our investigation peacefully.
in the end,
It had nothing to do with politics, it had nothing to do with crime. It was a problem between him and his partner. He behaved badly, which she couldn't stand, and while he was sleeping, she killed him. And then she wanted to get rid of the body by taking it back to the small apartment he had in Paris. She put him in the trunk of her car, and with her sister, they came to Paris to bring him back. Apartment, but when they arrived at Gournay-sur-Marne, in a place that had nothing to do with her, nothing at all, there are police lights and a checkpoint, so they get scared, they head toward the Sablières, and there they get rid of the body.
in fact, they were just scared in the end of the police lights that were in front of them.
That's it, so, but yes, but for us, it was terrible because that place had nothing to do with the victim. There was nothing. And so we really had we had a team leader, Michel Defarge, who understood that there was. At first, she told us that he had taken the train and gone back to Paris, so we were missing a day. What happened on Monday? Because she says he left on Sunday evening and was found on Tuesday morning very early in the Sablières. So what did he do on Monday? If you only knew, I went through a lot. The restaurants, all his friends, all his buddies, everything to try to rebuild, to reconstruct his schedule that famous Monday.
And how did you do it in the end? So,
it's an incredible stroke of luck. It's the food bolus. You know, when you have a victim, you do an autopsy, and during the autopsy, you recover what's called the food bolus, meaning what's left in your intestines. And then the medical examiner tells us the last thing he ate was chestnut cream. Listen, okay, so I'm one of the two who went around to all the restaurants near his place, asking on this date, did you have chestnut cream on your menu? It went on like that for a month and a half.
that is, you knock on the door like that and you go ask a few questions.
We see the restaurants and their owners.
It's like in the movies. You surprise me and it's the police.
You explain, yes, it's crazy.
This is what we call a neighborhood investigation, which has always existed since the beginning, since the dawn of time, and despite the contribution of modern political and scientific techniques, etc. The neighborhood investigation, that's the key part.
And so in this specific case, nobody had any chestnut cream. And then Michel Desfarges, our boss, he says, let's start everything over from the beginning. We're gonna go see the people who were over there, who emptied the house over there after his death. We'll talk to them and see if they have anything new. Do you know what they tell us during the conversation? That she emptied the fridge, which was full of chestnut cream. And so Michel Desfarges says, but the chestnut cream, he didn't eat it in Paris, he ate it at home, over there then. So actually he never left his home alive.
That's it, actually, he died over there. And after that, they transported him.
So from that moment on, they questioned his partner and then his sister, and they confessed pretty quickly. By the way...
So you have colleagues who joined the police out of a sense of duty, which is the case for our friend Charlie. And in front of you, you have a guy who joined by chance and out of necessity, but not because of what he did later. I had just finished my military service in Algeria, and I barely passed my high school diploma, then did a year at university. My father, a former soldier, understood that studying wasn't for me. I needed to work. And one day I was a supervisor in a small middle school in Bouquet. When I left the school, I saw a big poster being put up on the town hall. The police prefecture is hiring high school graduates as officers. And in big letters underneath, the police, a man's job. Let me make it clear right away that it wasn't that phrase that made the difference for me, because I take pride in myself. And I have a witness here for bringing in with Jacques Jancel the first woman in a criminal case, which wasn't easy. But specifically 82, we'll talk about 82 again. So I was, if you will, for me, the flow was like a fisherman going in circles. I was rather a Gaullist military father. And I say, and I've often said it, I fell into the cauldron of 36 Quai des Enfants and never came out again.
But that I find really interesting. In the book, you even go back to a time before 36 Quai des Enfants was created. If I'm not mistaken, you specifically go back to the period from 1889 to 1894 with the first case, François Ravachol. What happened? I noted a lone person placing homemade explosives in Paris buildings. What happened?
Ravachol, that's his nickname. He's an anarchist. His name is Königstein, Claudius. And that was the time of... It was necessary to prove that destroying this bourgeois society through action meant planting bombs or killing or assassinating. All right, there were a lot of assassinations at the time by anarchists and a lot of bomb attacks. Ravachol, who made a name for himself when he was younger, especially by killing an old woman. Well, we didn't know he was wanted especially for that, but he had already committed some shady acts before. All right. And Ravachol plants bombs in Paris, in several buildings, and he's wanted everywhere. And finally, he will eat in a Parisian restaurant, and there practically he brags about being the bomb planter. So the cafe waiter, he says, "Oh, come on, come on, come on. I'll come back after I've blown up the next one." And the worst part is he comes back and then the waiter calls the police and he gets arrested. Except they're going to blow up the cafe and kill people. So that period in the 1890s was a terrible time for Paris, for France, because there were a lot of bomb attacks. That's why we have to remember that Paris has always been the scene of attacks in every era. It's not something new.
He was finally arrested, actually.
He was arrested, he was guillotined, tried, sentenced, guillotined, and that's it. And so Ravachol also had the particularity of being identified because he refused to say his name. When he was arrested, he had no papers and refused to say who he was. And at the time, a man named Alphonse Bertillon developed a system of identification based on body measurements. They would take about 10, a little more than 10 measurements of your body, the length of your forearm, the circumference of your head, and so on. And then when they compared them, they would say, "Oh, but he was already arrested under this name at that time."
It was sort of the ancestor of photos they used, I think.
Yes, it was mainly the first identification system using biometric measurements in a way. And so he will be identified as Königstein, known in the south, in the center of France, for misdeeds. And that's how he is identified, and that's how we know we're dealing with a thug. Well, finally, a political thug. But still, the murders and thefts he commits, it's no longer for money. There's also a problem in the history of crime. It's that too often we're made to believe. I'm thinking of Jules Bonneau and Samand. Well, they're not anarchists, they're thugs. You might have maybe a philosopher in their group, but all the others are thugs and killers.
What's the story with Jules Bonneau, for example? They steal cars.
It's December 21, 1911. A car is speeding along with armed men inside who have just done the unthinkable. For the first time in the history of crime, a car is used for a robbery. The result, one dead, thousands of francs stolen, and France discovering a new face of banditry. Their leader, Jules Bonneau, 35 years old, a brilliant mechanic, a committed anarchist, and a ruthless criminal, along with his accomplices, Octave and René, will terrorize France for 6 months. Their robberies are absolutely insane and terrifying, but who are these men really?
It's a group that forms in the suburbs of Paris, in the Red Belt. They're anarchists and they want money because they're thugs, all right? And they have a driver named Jules Bonneau, a sharpshooter who was a sniper in the army and who drives incredibly well. He's able to repair a car very easily, very quickly. And then there are the others. There's Valet, who's a killer. And then there's Raymond Lascience, who's the theorist of the gang. He's the one who will give the gang its anarchist character. In reality, the others are pretty much just thugs. And so they will start committing thefts while they attack. They'll break into people's safes, home invasions. The problem is it's not going all that well. They kill people during these attacks, and most importantly, they end up killing 2 police officers because a policeman tries to stop them in Paris. And Valet kills Valet. He kills a police officer who has the same name as him, and he kills him in the street. And after that, they go on to carry out attacks against others.
He's not there when he does that.
But no, because they managed to escape with the car. At that time, the police didn't have cars. No, at that time, the police were either on horseback or on bicycles, and it's them who commit. On Rue Ordonnaire in the 18th district, the first motorized holdup in history. So they snatched the bag of a Société Générale collector. So it's December 1911.
It's a bag with money inside. Ah, well, there you go.
But they shoot him and they shoot at the other one too. So 1 dead, 1 wounded, and he runs away with the money. And that's the beginning. Then there will be a manhunt, but they keep attacking, stealing, looting. So they steal a car, a very beautiful car, in the south of Paris by killing the 2 people in the car, the driver and his master. They attack a bank in Chantilly, killing people everywhere. They kill. So in the end, they have quite a record. Among them, not all will be sentenced to death, not all will be executed. But still, at the time, the case of the gang of subscribers, it was a huge media case. It was enormous.
Let's go back to Alphonse Bertillon. He was the initiator of modern policing. I mean, it has to be said that this was the case up until the 1990s. We'll come back to that. Earlier, almost nothing happened, basically, but Alphonse Bertillon, we both share a memory, which is that he invented something for one.
A seat-on
The camp that
makes you visible from the front and side.
all the wrongdoers, and all the cops who, at the time, between Francis XVI, his brother, were caught.
Our photos are there.
There's a photo of Alphonse.
Both of us when we were. So,
Alphonse Bertillon, don't forget him over some publicity.
Because it's true that I didn't mention it, but actually the book is also completely illustrated. I saw that there are illustrations everywhere.
there are a lot of photos that are completely unpublished.
I'll stay a bit longer in this period, mainly because of the Auguste Vaillant case, which I found fascinating. Maybe we can explain what happened?
It's huge, but again, it's another attack, and we have an attack that is carried out in the chamber in the Palais Bourbon. That is, a bomb is placed. A marmite at the time, just imagine something made of cast iron. You put ingredients inside to make everything explode, and you add nails like this. On top of that, you injure as many people as possible. Except that it doesn't work, the attempts fail. And here, it's not going to explode, so actually it will explode, but it won't destroy everything. So as a result, it just goes poof, right? And no one is seriously injured, no one is killed. But do you realize at the time we were in the Third Republic, where the power was in the Chamber of Deputies? It's not the executive, it's the Chamber of Deputies. That's where everything is decided, and that's what they tried to attack.
It all begins on December 9, 1893 at the Palais Bourbon in Paris. It's 4 p.m, the National Assembly is in session, and the deputies are lazily debating local issues. Suddenly, a bomb explodes right in the chamber. Panic, screams, confusion. Around 60 people are injured, with nails over 3 centimeters long piercing the victims. Miraculously, no one is killed. From the public galleries above, a man has just thrown this homemade device filled with nails, zinc, and lead. His name is Auguste Vaillant, 32 years old, an anarchist, destitute, and the father of a little girl. Who is this man? And above all, why did he do this?
And so Auguste Vaillant, who is the bomber, will be arrested and guillotined. Because there is also a phenomenon happening during this period. It's a phenomenon of action and reaction. That is to say, they commit a horrible act, we arrest them, we execute them, because the guillotine was still working very, very actively. And the other anarchists would plant more bombs or commit more assassinations, so it didn't stop. You have all these years in the 1890s when the police gained importance in every area, especially in the field of political policing. And it's an incredible period, and at 36, which is on Orfèvres, it's the security service that's still in place at that time.
What was the security service then?
It's the same thing as the Association of Professional Journalists, but it's the old name for the Association of Professional Journalists, and it was created by Vidocq. A convict, a former convict, you have to know that too. France has this peculiarity. Its most well-known, most famous investigative service was set up by a convict. On the run, escaped. That's what we talk about in the book. Also, yes,
I'm moving forward a bit into a more distant period, but there's a chapter called The President Was Killed, about the assassination of Paul Doumer. It might be the same for those who don't necessarily know, first of all, just how this assassination happened.
if you like. In France, there are 2 presidents who were assassinated. Sadi Carnot, who was assassinated in 1894 in Lyon by an Italian Carbonari. And then in Paris, we have Paul Doumer, who as president was a president of the Third Republic. That is to say, without any particular history.
No.
But without any particular history, he's a skilled politician. Well, he was elected president by Congress and he's doing his job. And especially on that day, so we're in 1932, that day he's not going to inaugurate the chrysanthemums, but he's going to a book fair or a book fair for veterans. And well, by his presence, it's to attract people to sell books. And then there is, let's say, a fanatic. Gogolov is his name, and Gogolov, whom Marcel Guillaume, whom Claude mentioned earlier, so Commissioner Marcel Guillaume, who is the head of the criminal brigade, which at the time was called the Special Brigade. Gogolov pulls out a weapon and shoots the president.
Where did this happen? It was in the crowd.
It's right next to the Madeleine on a small street, Berryer Street, which is a small,
In a little alley. There you go.
Then that's it. There was a book fair at that place, And so the president, he is taken there. We think he can or could survive, but he doesn't survive.
No, he doesn't die instantly.
No, almost never, actually, because people tell me, well, he died. No, he was shot that day and he dies in the hours that follow. And so Gogolov is immediately arrested. And the first job of the police, actually, in these cases, is to prevent him from being lynched by the crowd. You know, there were a lot of people at the time, especially soldiers or former soldiers. They grab the guy and the police step in to make sure he doesn't get lynched. And also so they can question him to find out who's behind this. The idea is that the investigation should help determine whether we're dealing with a gang or an organization. Gogolov is Russian, so we wonder, isn't he? Being directed by activists. Russian revolutionaries. So we need to know then. Gogolov is taken to the 36th, which is hell, yet again. Interrogated by Marcel Guillaume, and he admits that he wanted to harm France and the President of the Republic. It was his way of protesting France's position towards Tsarist Russia.
A great man, Marcel Guillaume.
Yeah, and Marcel Guillaume, the commissioner who interrogated him, who left behind sensational memoirs and was the main inspiration for Maigret, for Commissioner Maigret. Marcel Guillaume recounts the interview he had with him. And so, when Claude was temporarily the head of the criminal brigade, he sat down in an armchair. Where Marcel Guillaume? Who was Marcel Guillaume's armchair?
A very, very elegant guy, very distinguished, who loved his job above all, but who had a bit of a weakness for the ladies. And when, after the interrogation at night at 3 or 4 in the morning, he went home, the world rested a little, even if he had to come back 3 hours later to the 36. Well, he would make a little detour through a small neighborhood in Paris where he had a girlfriend, unlike the second one we were talking about earlier. They followed me to the commissioner, who was rather stocky and who, like Maigret, would go home to his mother at 3 in the morning.
Yes.
The commissioner, but 2 series chiefs who spent their lives at work.
There were some characters. Because you saw it in the book, there are a lot of portraits of police officers from all eras, and some of them are amazing. You have, for example, Gustave Rossignol. He was the king of disguise. That meant that in Paris, when there was a tale to do, he had a little wardrobe, he would choose the clothes. And then, during the day, if you crossed paths with him 3 times, you wouldn't be able to recognize him. It's extraordinary, this Gustave Rossignol, who was wounded I don't know how many times, who was a man full of a great investigator.
By the way, regarding the president's assassin, there was a motive and an organization behind it.
It was him, he was a lone wolf, and still a little bit, we won't say unbalanced, but fanatical, a bit like Raoul Villain, who killed Jaurès at the end of July 1914. Same thing, there was no organization, no one ever proved the existence of an organization behind it, but he still assassinated Jaurès.
And it wasn't ordered?
And so he was acquitted.
What was that case? What happened?
Jean Jaurès, then, leader, socialist deputy, he was at one point vice president of the Chamber of Deputies. and he was against the war. He was a man of peace. He believed that the alliance between all workers from all European countries could prevent a war decided by the powerful, decided by kings and emperors. Well, at the end of July, after an attack that took place in Sarajevo and an ultimatum issued by Austria-Hungary, a declaration of war was made. And because of the system of alliances, France comes in, is brought to order a general mobilization soon. And there Jaurès tries, believes that he can still save peace. And on the evening of July 31st, while he is sitting at a table in a cafe restaurant, Le Croissant, on a street that still exists, Rue du Croissant, Rue Montmartre. If you go there, there's a plaque that says here, Jean Jaurès was killed. And so Raoul Villain, who is a fanatic, who is overzealous, who believes that Jaurès will prevent France from recovering Alsace and Lorraine, he armed himself with a pistol that he bought and he takes advantage. You know, it's very, very hot that July day. The Breisbeis, which is a sash window, is lowered. And so through the window, he will shoot 2 bullets into the back of the neck. One that goes off, crosses the room without killing anyone, and the second one that kills Jaurès. There you go. And Raoul Villain will be arrested immediately. They also prevent him from being lynched. And he is tried in 1919. And in 1919, France had won the war, which means that Raoul Villain, luckily he was there, because otherwise we wouldn't have won the war and we wouldn't have gotten Alsace and Lorraine back. So as a result, he was acquitted, which is incredible, because that means that in this case, we still haven't found Jaurès' killer, so justice hasn't found Jaurès' killer. And do you have other cases like this where we stop? Mrs. Caillot, same thing, who was the wife of a very famous minister at the time. And here it's a newspaper from that time that writes revelations about her husband. You don't want to quote me? No, I don't want to. And so she comes, Henriette Caillot comes into the office of the head of this newspaper and kills him. So she has a muff with a small weapon, she takes out the weapon and she kills. So there she is alone in the room, she is arrested, questioned by the police, she admits everything. And then afterwards they're going to tell her, I didn't really understand why all that happened. And then later during the trial, they're still going to prove that it was still a lack of tact on the part of the newspaper to make revelations about the couple's private life, especially about her husband's relationship with another woman, and so on. Well, we can understand, we can also understand, that is to say, in a way, the jurors didn't want this tabloid press, that's it. But actually here too, the poor victim. The British Medical Journal and the murderer in this case were never arrested if we are to believe the justice system.
Because, so, in the end, she killed him because he cheated on her. It's because No.
It's because she had a life before he had a life. It's a story. Back then, people kept it when you didn't want anyone to know, you burned the letters. And here in this case, a lot of letters remained and were published. And so it created a scandal. It's a political and sentimental scandal.
Yes, that's it, okay.
But it was very hard, and it's the same. Today, people tell us that today's world is very hard. But when you see the terms that were used in the newspapers at the time, the revelations that were made, but today it's nothing compared to that. So when people tell you that things were better before, I can tell you, as someone who goes through a lot of archives and old newspapers, no, it was just different.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's not the same.
I'm moving forward a little bit in time as well, always in the chapters, because I think it's pretty chronological. Actually, it is chronological. Yeah, that's right.
And by the way, for the last part, we added a chapter to cover the cases from the last 5 years. Yeah.
There's especially the motion about the Alexandra Stavisky case. So what is it? He's a kind of swindler.
Who is this Russian man, naturalized as French, who lived like a prince? In Paris, he just embezzled more than 200 million francs in a massive scam at the Municipal Credit Bank of Bayonne. But the most scandalous thing is that he had support at the highest levels of the state. Deputies, ministers, magistrates, everyone turned a blind eye. His trials were postponed indefinitely. So, did he take his own life, or was it murder?
Yes, he's a crook. He was already known as a crook in Paris. He had a record with his photo and fingerprints. And then he set up a scheme, how can we call it, a scam based on credit. Basically, you give me your money, you'll get a very interesting return. And in reality, you do this with a lot of people staggered over time. And then you pay those who are supposed to get money with the money people give you. That system, he was doing it with a lot of loan companies across France, a real charmer. And then he fooled everyone, And also, it has to be said, there was corruption. That is to say, in order to do what he did, he had to give money to politicians, to police officers, to a lot of people.
Why did he give money? Otherwise he'd be caught.
Because otherwise he would have been reported pretty quickly, that's it. Okay, yeah. I mean, when someone tried to report him, it would get to those people who would say, no, this guy is perfectly honest. Okay, that works. Yeah, there you go. I'm exaggerating, but that's the idea. And at some point it blows up because people want their money. And then it's no longer possible with this system. Like that, at some point, that's it. At some point, it just doesn't work anymore. And so now he's identified, he's going to be arrested, and then he runs away, He hides in a cabin in the Alps. And here the police, and it's not the Quai des Orfèvres police though, it's the security police. Yes, that's right, it's the National Security Police. Back then it was still called the General Security, but it's the police of the other police, the police of all of France, who come to arrest him. And then he goes ahead and allows himself to be captured, which causes yet another scandal, because people say now it was the police who shot him, they acted on orders and everything. If you knew the conspiracy theories around which we are the main actors, the main characters, there are plenty of them in every era.
There are even still some today.
There are still some today.
What are the theories? I have no idea. What are some of the theories people have, or the...
Because if you want, when we present, and it's not the former director of the Association of Professional Journalists, because he also experienced that even closer to power than I did. But when we conduct our investigations, I think, for example, of the investigation you led into the death of Orfèvres.
It all begins on April 7, 1994, around 8 p.m. at the Élysée Palace, when a gendarme enters the office of François de Orfèvres. He finds him dead, sitting in his armchair, a Magnum 357 revolver in his hand, with obviously a bullet in his head. Who is this man, François de Orfèvres, 76 years old, a longtime friend of François Mitterrand, the president's man in the shadows? In short, for 13 years he was his closest advisor, the keeper of all his little secrets. But then, here too, did he take his own life? Someone tried to make it seem accidental.
So he dies at the Élysée, in the Élysée Palace. And there, Claude, maybe you want to tell us how you...
Yes, it's very simple. I'm in my office. It's 8:45 post-meridium with my closest associate, number 2, Jean-Thierry Vigion. At the time, we had an old piece of furniture with all the television cards, the little lights that would turn on the desk. And there was one that was red. When it lit up, it was the police chief. "Come on, it's ringing." He says to me, "Why are you still here?" And I said, "Hey, you'll get it." And he says to me, "Look, I just got a call from the Élysée, Chassigneux, I think, from Orfèvres. He just shot himself in his office at the Élysée." So I gave instructions that nothing should be touched, that you would be coming with your team to make the observations, etc. I informed the public prosecutor, who was an excellent prosecutor, Bruno Cotter, who was too far from Paris, and who sent one of his colleagues, the first deputy. I can tell you that between the trip, 36 Quai des Orfèvres and 55 women at Saint-Honoré, it didn't take us much time at that hour. Moreover, and with my deputy, it was seen right away. My God, everything has to be in order. Of course, the forensic identification unit was notified. We'll all meet at the Élysée.
What do you see when you get there? Do you see the crime scene? Is it you?
Before seeing the crime scene, we were instructed to enter by car through the small entrance at Nuit Marigny. And we notice, with my deputy John Sligen, the presence of an ambulance. I'll talk about it in 2 minutes, you'll see. So, it's needless to tell you the state in which all the people at the Élysée were. All right, I mentioned Chassigneux. There were, how should I put it, the heads of the gendarmerie, and there was the duty doctor. And well, we enter the room where we discover Rousseau's body. In the opposition, so much indeed, he shot himself, a trace of blood, etc. The observations are made. There, a little problem. We learned that de Grossouvre is living. What is Branly? What is Branly? It's the annex of the Élysée where some important people live. And I say to the deputy prosecutor, well, since we can't find any documents on site, it often happens that people who commit suicide leave letters, right? But not always. Sometimes we find nothing, no documents. We have to go right away. What's Branly? And then he says to me, do you think so, etc. I said, listen, call Bruno Cote. He called Bruno Cote. We talked. He said we had to go. So we were criticized for going very late to de Grossouvre's home to make the observations and to go there then. It's true that the time that passed between when we made the observations and when we went to de Grossouvre's home, that is about an hour and a half past, I don't know. And then there we found in his, well, there I had never seen anything like it in my life. I'm not a hunter, but hunting weapons, that's something. He can breathe?
He was a special advisor for hunting, among other things, okay?
I had an inspector who was interested in the hunting rifle. He had never seen that before. We had found in a box of cartridges from which he had taken out the cartridges to put in his revolver, in which he... There you go. So there's an anecdote, though, that's extraordinary. It's that after the findings he heard, he says, come back to 36, the police prefect wants to see me. I go to his office. And he told me that in 16 we missed a state affair. He asked me why. He told me it was because I was looking for his name, Chara, who was one of Mitterrand's advisors. She calls the police chief to tell him that among Mitterrand's advisors, some say that something should be done. They brought an ambulance to transport the body to Valeur-Grasse, to cast doubt on the theory that he didn't die at the Élysée. Anyway, it's a crazy story. Imagine for a second if that had happened. Then it would have been a state affair, the police officers said to Charas. Above all, don't touch anything. The director and PG will arrive with associates. Some are already here.
So, for those who didn't understand, he's saying that they wanted to move the body into an ambulance, and that's to make people believe that he didn't die at the Élysée.
No, since that's where we are.
She took it very badly.
You see, 36 Paris, it's about the government, assemblies, etc. And as soon as there's a case that's a little out of the ordinary, the Louvre, etc. What people don't know is that these so-called legendary squads, the Banditry Repression Brigade, the Criminal Squad, the Fraud Squad, also handle cases, small cases. The Banditry Repression Brigade, you look at the question of identity. They have a group that hunts pickpockets in the subway or at tourist spots. Nobody ever talks about it.
I'll shift the subject a bit. In the book, there's a chapter called Behind the Scenes of the Vice Squad. What was that era like? What was happening?
I'll talk to you about the distant past, and then Claude will tell you about the more recent times since he was there. Okay, so the distant past. In Paris, there was a vice squad. This vice squad specifically monitored brothels and also controlled prostitution in the streets. And then there was a law that said prostitutes were required, obligated to undergo regular medical checkups, and so they had to be registered, they had to be known, and they had to have a paper stamped by the doctor. All right, if there was an inspection and you were neither registered nor checked, then you risked being sent to Saint-Lazare prison. They would take you to prison. All right, so the Morals Brigade, its officers were in charge of this work. And unfortunately, it was often thugs who took advantage of the situation, who took advantage of the girls who did as well. In blackmail, when the girls told them that a certain person liked to dress up as this or that, they would blackmail them. So for a very long time, we had a morals police that was not acceptable. And so we decided to attach it to 36 Quai des Orfèvres, to the judicial police.
You said it was unacceptable. What exactly did they do?
They were corrupt cops, really corrupt, non-stop, right? And so...
There you go. And that's a word we didn't use back then.
There you go, a word we didn't use back then. To tell you, some of them didn't hesitate to set up schemes against politicians. At one point, we made people believe that a politician had a pedophile activity. It was completely false. It was a setup. That vice squad, we're talking about the years 1880 to 1890, so it will cease to exist. And it will move to the Quai des Orfèvres under the name of the Vice Squad, which will still work a lot on prostitution. Before the Martha Richard law, after World War II made it disappear, the brothels, so they closed the brothels, that's it. And Claude arrives at the Vice Squad a few years later in
1963? I got my first job when I was accepted by the Human Resources Manager. At the time they asked me, "Where do you live?" I had found a bathroom in a shabby hotel. Near Pigalle, they asked me, "Do you want something active or rather sedentary?" Me, active. 4th Territorial Brigade, it was the local police which covered 2 or 3 districts. There were 6 at the time. And so here I am on H.C. Martinet Street, all set, Pigalle. For 3 months, I was around prostitution and heterism. Pigalle was completely different then. The atmosphere and smells were unlike anything I'd experienced before. In Algeria, it was so different back then, to see it, to experience it. The boss of the Vice Squad is named André Saint-Bileux. A little bit like that, upright, heading a department where there were still some crooks. It was quite a shady department. And realizing what he had on his hands, he was going to rejuvenate and bring in some new blood. 9 young people who came from outside. I found myself assigned to the Vice Squad, and the day the boss told me, "When did you apply for the Vice Squad?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you're assigned on Monday." So I go up, it's the famous staircase. For the first time, my heart is pounding because at the same time, it was still a prestigious department. I was proud to be assigned there. And at the same time, a little worried about what I would find. I was lucky to meet 2 or 3 colleagues like that who took me under their protective wing, telling me, man, be careful. You won't go out with that colleague because he'll lead you astray. You won't hang out in that place. So what was the Vice Squad? The Vice Squad, it fought both against pimping and all the issues of morals. At the time, homosexuality was a crime. There was a group that dealt with homosexuals. We were in the detective police group. There weren't many volunteers to go. Adultery was a crime. We've forgotten that. There were 2 cops who handled so-called recommended cases, meaning the minister who was cheated on. He'd have his bodyguard file a police complaint, the commissioner would contact the prosecutor, and immediately the Vice Squad would step in. And when one of his 2 colleagues, one of them was on vacation, he would call on one of the younger ones. I was one of the younger ones to give them a hand. At that time, I was uncomfortable going early in the morning. "Good morning, ma'am. We're coming, Commissioner Gattoir. Where is your lover then?" An extraordinary story. And one winter morning in 1964 or 1965, someone knocked on the door, and a lady in a nightgown came to open it for us. "Sir, I know why you're here, but I'm all alone." "Ma'am, we have to." So we go into the bedroom.
Go there, why? That's the reason.
The husband had filed a complaint for adultery, so we came to confirm the adultery.
You simply do it to hire a man.
It was the presence of the lover, Alaï. He's not her husband, that's all. It's okay. How do you say, "Let's go to the bedroom"?
Then to see that the bed has been unmade, that there are skulls.
Pillows not far away. She didn't sleep alone and her lover couldn't be found. They found him on a balcony upstairs, completely naked, shivering from the cold. So I don't know if she hit him or if that's them, so if I don't have it.
He tried to escape from the police. He had hidden outside in freezing weather.
So
There were really icicles.
finding them was also the narcotics unit. It was the narcotics unit, but back then the narcotics unit was 5 or 6 officers. Can you imagine? Now there are 130, 140.
Elsewhere, Claude just, I'm quoting him, that's why it's called the Vice Squad. Why is it called the Vice Squad? In the word vice, there's nothing about prostitution. No, it's because they also dealt with drugs. And at the time, drugs were heavily trafficked. And especially in the most upscale circles,
And so
the officers of the Vice Squad were often required to have an outfit that allowed them to blend in discreetly in these upscale circles. So that's why it was called the Vice Squad.
I was still in a group we called the Gallantry, which was in charge of dismantling high-end prostitution rings. There were the Grand Madams in watercolor, Madame Claude, Millie, who were, how should I say, allowed to carry out their activities. In exchange for information they gave us about the personalities who frequented these girls. Madame Claude had the most beautiful girls from all over the world who took planes to go to the Emirates, to South America or elsewhere, who were paid by personalities who had influence.
It's incredible. Maybe I'll move forward just a little bit in time because a few years later, you also go back to the dark times, the occupation. I found it really interesting to do a mini apartheid. A bit about that. You talk in particular, I think, about Abel Dames. So, he's a gangster who finds his place in the parallel police during the occupation. How does that work?
It all starts in 1941 at 93 Lauriston Street in Paris. In this bourgeois building, the Carling settles in, the French Gestapo, a gang of criminals working for the Nazis who torture, extort and murder. Among them, a giant, Abel Danos, nicknamed the Mammoth. He's 37 years old and a member of the Paris underworld. He is arrested for various offenses and offers his services to the German police to avoid prison. Danos becomes one of the most feared executioners of the occupation. Torture, execution, hunting down resistance fighters and manages the Jew, terror in the heart of occupied Paris. But the character is shady. Some claim that he also helped to free Jews, and that in reality he was playing both sides. But then, who was he really?
No, it's simply, it's a sadness that time when part of France entered into collaboration. The Germans, they were the ones in power, they were the ones who made the decisions, but they needed to carry out certain operations, especially the dispossession of Jewish families. They needed to have, let's say, cops, thugs who were capable of anything, all right? And so
They recruited collaborators, meaning people who agreed to work with them, for anyone wondering.
with the Nazis. Yes, so if you want, we're in a time when Hitler has defeated France, a government has been put in place, the French state is set up in Vichy. Since Paris is in the occupied zone, France is divided into an occupied zone and a so-called free zone until 1942. Afterwards, the Germans will invade everything completely, but at that time, Paris is in the occupied zone. So there is a police prefect, of course, but the government itself is in Vichy, all right? And so the Germans, for the dispossession, for the theft, quite simply the theft, or also for the recovery of raw materials. Yes, Germany wants raw materials, so to recover them more efficiently, they need to know people who are scheming, who are involved in all these somewhat shady circles. And they use former inmates, criminals. And among them, there's the whole gang of Bonny and Lafon, who are two absolutely awful characters, one of whom is a former police officer, and they will form a group. We'll call it the Carling, and this Carling will do all the dirty work. It's also called the French Gestapo, okay, and they're the ones who will do all sorts of dirty tricks and assassinations, everything you can imagine, and above all, theft and the confiscation of property. Okay, for Jewish families, basically, they know when a certain family is going to be rounded up. Then the next day, everything is emptied out, paintings and so on and so on. Well, it was a practice they carried out with the blessing of the Germans who, in my opinion, also benefited from it. That's it.
The emperor's hitting the jackpot.
So, the problem also is that during that period, a number of French police officers, police chiefs were abominable. There were notably two special brigades in the General Intelligence, the BS-1 and the BS-2, which dealt either with the resistance or with the hunting and pursuit of Jewish families. And so those police officers were abominable. They did everything. They used torture, everything you can imagine that's worst. And so at the end of the war, several of them would be executed, others would flee, and others would go before a commission. It was also criticized because the police purge was very, very harsh, including towards people who in the end hadn't done much or maybe even nothing at all.
Mr. ended up where?
Today, Georges Massou, the thin commissioner, he ended up in prison. Well, he was cleared, he was exonerated, but he was accused of a lot of things. So there you go, this period is very dark for us, very dark for France as well. Because in the end, the police officers are, after all, just a reflection of the population.
We had heroes among us, among our colleagues, after all.
And we had many, many members of the resistance, and that we don't talk about much.
Charlie knows about it. When I was assigned to the territorial brigade, the boss told me, I'm going to give you a mentor. The mentor was the one who would guide you. No one worked with him. He has a bad temper, but he's a good cop. I asked myself, why did no one work with him? And I learned a long time after that he was suspected by his colleagues of having been one of the dirty cops, the collaborators. Anyway, he slipped through the cracks, but I admit that, as far as I'm concerned, he only gave me good advice. He was a good cop.
So you should know that the Paris police headquarters rose up on August 19, 1944, and that the police as a whole will be awarded the Legion of Honor by General de Gaulle for their role in the liberation of Paris. And there are many police officers who were recognized as righteous among the nations then. There were bastards, there were absolutely despicable people, and there were heroes, there were really good people, several of whom died in concentration camps or under torture.
It's relevant to go back a bit to the murderers of the 30 glorious years. It's a chapter you also talk about in the book, especially Joatia.
Well, Joatia was a bit special. It's not really. We can't really call him a murderer in the strict sense. Joatia was part of the front-wheel drive gang.
What did he do, him?
In the end, he was a thug. He was a thug. But during the war, he was at odds with those we talked about earlier, the Carlingues or Joatia. Me, I don't necessarily think badly of him. A thug, sure, who paid in part, but nothing to do with the others. Earlier, we were talking about Abeldanos. We could talk, for example, about Loutrel, about Pierre de Loutrel, or about Boucher Sèche and Barca, and about Faben Barca. So you see, there's even a continuity among the thugs, because we go from Boucher Sèche, who was present in the Tractions gang before, and whom we'll find again, some 20 years later, in the Ben Barca affair.
Ben Barca, I was a young inspector at the Mandé in '68. Paris?
October 29, 1965. In front of the Lippe Brasserie on Boulevard Saint-Germain, Mehdi Ben Barka is about to have lunch with friends to discuss a film project about decolonization. He is 45 years old, the leader of the Moroccan opposition, sentenced to death by King Hassan II. Suddenly, two men approach him, plainclothes French police officers, who tell him, "You have a meeting with political figures, follow us." Ben Barka gets into the car. He will never be seen again. His body will never be found. The investigation reveals a chilling conspiracy. The Moroccan secret services organized the kidnapping with the complicity of French police officers, Service de Documentation Extérieure et de Contre-Espionnage agents, and Parisian gangsters. Ben Barka is tortured, then murdered. His body disappears. But is all this really true, or is it just a conspiracy theory?
Those two cops from La Mandaine, Souchon and Voitot, who kidnapped Ben Barka, the lawyer who was opposed to the King of Morocco,
So,
they said they received a phone call from the Élysée, which they actually did. They acted on the instructions of their informant, who was Lopez, who was the head of the Air France agency at Orly, who worked with the Service de Documentation Extérieure et de Contre-Espionnage, and who tricked them by saying, "Here, you have to arrest him." With their service car in front of the Lippe Brasserie, Ben Barka taking him to that address. So what should they do?
In fact, the guy in question was working for General Oufkir, the head of Moroccan intelligence, so actually he wanted to eliminate Ben Barka and do it discreetly. After having him kidnapped by French police officers who were partly manipulated,
Most of the perpetrators were arrested. Oufkir was executed by firing squad in Algeria. But believe it or not, 68. In 2015, I'm in my countryside in Gers. I get a call from a clerk of a judge who told me, "Sir, you'll be surprised, but the judge would like to hear from you." In the Ben Barka case, damn, can you believe it? 2015, the Ben Barka case. I'm sorry, but I hope it's not urgent. But no. When you come back in the fall, I'll talk to the judge. You know why he listened to me. I wrote a book that Charlie also worked on about the Vice Squad. I wrote a book about the Vice Squad, and I talk about the Ben Barka case. There is still a civil party constitution in play at the courthouse. One of the sons saw the judge and said, No, I just read the book by Quansest. If he talks about the Ben Barka case, he must have some revelations to make, and he didn't want to say any revelations. I could do it. It's fabulous.
That's it.
Yeah, it was extraordinary.
at the time this Ben Barka case created, it was terrible for the Paris police, because really Charles de Gaulle, the president, was very angry with the police chief and with the officers from the 36th precinct. And people thought it was going to be the end of the Parisian criminal police. What?
It was the so-called state within the state. It was the state within the state, and it still is the state within the state.
So there was a meeting where the police prefect tried to reassure everyone, right? And Claude was there.
I was talking earlier about murderers. Sorry, I meant stranglers. So what's happening now?
There were lots and lots and lots of crimes, right?
Is there one that stood out to you like that while you were doing research?
Yes, the one that is, well, Claude, I'd like you to talk about yours, the one you worked on. From Val d'Oise.
Pesquet.
There you go.
This is more recent here.
Yes, but these are the years. It's what we call the assassins, the stranglers.
So Bernard Pesquet.
August 11, 1976 in Val d'Oise, the police searched the home of Bernard Pesquet, a simple 54-year-old house painter. In his basement, he discovers horror, the skeleton of his wife and the decomposing body of his real estate agent. But then, what really happened?
It's a small case that left an impression on us. He had worked for a couple of real estate agents who lived in Neuilly while they were doing renovation, learning, and so on. One day, he announced by letter that he had been contacted by the real estate agent saying, "I'll come on this day to see the work. How do we organize this?" and so on. And it was in July, I think. 1976, we were contacted by the police station. The first intermediary in all these cases is the emergency police. I'd like to take this opportunity to say a few words. With Charlie, we're doing well, to pay tribute to those who are never mentioned. The cops, both men and women, who are in the emergency police vans and respond to anonymous calls, they don't know what they're going to find. Most of our cases start like that, and the Bataclan, since we're unfortunately talking about the Bataclan right now, the first responders were an emergency police van. It's the same thing. It's Commissioner Alabake and his driver who are at Place de la République, and over the radio they hear shooting at the Bataclan. They go to the scene to provide assistance, they know how to give aid, they do what, according to protocol, they normally shouldn't have done. We had to do it that way. We waited for the arrival of the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention, etc. They enter the place with nothing, no vests, no bulletproof gear, nothing, and they find themselves facing Russians who are shooting. And the head of the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention, who led the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention, who did a great job, as you know. Formula paid tribute to this commissioner and his driver, who saved I don't know how many lives. I'll close the parenthesis about the police rescue. In the police rescue operation, they found 3 bodies in the apartment. The real estate agent, his wife, an apartment without the southwest. We've seen truck accidents before, but this was something else. The horror, he was in the hallway, killed by 2 bullets. She was on the bed, and the cleaning lady was in the bathroom. Anyway, it was something incredible. And during the meetings, we found that famous letter I told you about, in which Bernard Pesquet announced he was coming. It's too good. It can't be about the author, but still, we're going to move quickly. So what is this letter? Sorry, this letter, what is it? So In this letter, he announced he would come that very day, saying, following our phone conversation, I will come to go over the range of work I have to do at your place, etc. He said he'd come on the day of the crime, which seems too good to be true. We returned in the middle of the night, if that's what he gave them. You know that after 9 p.m. we can't go pick people up except in special cases like drug trafficking, etc. And we do some research in our archives and we find out that he has a criminal record. But back then it was the Middle Ages. His criminal record was at Chennai. We could only check it the next morning at 9 a.m. The boss who goes home says, still, we're here. Let's do a quick check. We'll go look for it. Tomorrow morning, it's Bernard Pesquet, who was at Tremblay-les-Villages. To get this witness who seems important, the theory is, do you think it's him at that moment? No, because the criminal record doesn't mean anything, but already it didn't help us. Because you can be a witness in a criminal case, and your name is in the file in Chennai. But the inspector who goes to consult in Chennai at 9 a.m. calls us and tells us, Bernard Pesquet, he was sentenced to death in 1941 for murder. He was released after 20 years in 1961. Ah, yes, that's terrible. So, no need to tell you that the colleagues who had gone to get him, we called them by radio because we didn't have cell phones, stop at the nearest police station and we tell them, you didn't give him the cans. Give him the cans right away. And then I have a memory, that's what Charlie wants me to tell, this story. I was in the office next to the bosses with a few inspectors. Some colleagues arrived with Bernard Pesquet and brought him into the office. At that moment, Pierre Ottawa and the boss walked by. It was lunchtime, and as they saw us, we looked at each other, and seeing Pesquet's expression, we all had the same reaction. We talked about it afterward. The looks could kill. So imagine that during his search, right away, of course, a strip search among his belongings, we find a credit card belonging to the Barrow couple. That was it. After that, I'll get to the point. The colleagues went to do a search behind a huge house with, how should I put it, a property, car parts, piles of bricks, and so on. The colleagues come back and tell me, we did the search, we stayed for 4 hours, but we have to go back. Pretty much the whole squad with the picks and all, we go back there a few days later and then we make a discovery. It was like a crescendo. First we find the keys to the apartment of the Barrow couple.
Of whom? Sorry.
The couple, the victims, the Barrow couple, they were the victims, sorry. In the process, we found jewelry that had been coverings. It was the police officers who brought that. It was Pesquet. He said, you're the one who brought these items. And then we find the murder weapon, which turns out to be the murder weapon. What was the weapon?
It was a
revolver, a pistol. I think it was a 1667. And in the afternoon then, in all these cases, there's a crime. That probably hasn't changed. During the operations, the searches, you have a colleague who is in charge not only of guarding the detainees, possibly with a police officer, but above all, observing their reactions depending on the movements of those we will find in the afternoon. We realize that in the living room where he is, there is a door that leads to a basement. And when the inspectors head towards the basement, we will address it. And there we found 2 bodies, the body of his wife and that of another real estate agent.
So that's 2 extra bodies besides those.
That you already have.
So it's not over, you'll see. And he confesses right away, even though he always lied, even during his 2 times on the rope, because he went twice on the rope, he always lied. The 3 murders. But here, he admits it. He says, yes, I'm the one who killed my wife because she was cheating on me with the officer. He was making a fool of me, which was nonsense. That's something. And imagine during the search, at one point we find in a shoebox a box full of passports and identification cards. We start to think, actually, it's not what we thought it was anymore. Because among the scams he had done, he had a numbered scam, and he was carrying it with his passports.
He's someone who, as Claude said, felt a lack of empathy. He's someone with a coldness who looks at you as if you were nothing, who wouldn't have any problem killing you just like that, to get rid of the problem that you represent.
The question that arose is what Ale did between 1961 and his authorization in 1976.
That's it because he was 20 years old? No, oh yes.
Because these are people, in my opinion, who are incapable of stopping themselves from continuing.
He may have done things we haven't found yet.
It's possible. You know, we didn't have a 100% clearance rate. Only Lieutenant Colombo gets 100% in less than an hour and a half. Back then, we didn't have DNA, we didn't have video calls like we're doing now, no surveillance camera footage, no cell phone geolocation or anything like that. So there were a lot of cases that weren't solved. The criminal brigade, which handled the toughest cases, had an average clearance rate of about 54%, even though they took on the most difficult cases. So you can imagine in other departments you could slip through the cracks.
I also thought it was relevant to go back to two kidnappings that you talk about in the book. First, the kidnapping of Bernard Mallet, I believe, in 1977. What's happening?
August 9, 1977, in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris, Bernard Mallet, a banker, is walking his dog. Suddenly, he is sprayed with tear gas and kidnapped by a gang of criminals. They take him to a house in Plessis-Robinson in the suburbs of Paris. There, he will be chained up in a basement. 300 police officers are mobilized to find him, and this case hides an absolutely incredible outcome.
Now, that's a very interesting question because it's without a doubt the greatest case, one of the greatest successes of the Research and Intervention Brigade, the Lille bust. This case was discussed for years in I don't know how many European police academies. In a nutshell, the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention was created in 1964 by François Lemoine, who was an incredible guy and was the head of a territorial brigade. At that time, he realized that his colleagues were spending more time typing up reports than actually being out in the field, which hasn't changed much. We had this idea that was both brilliant and very simple. We should create a service that goes after criminals, especially organized crime, to catch them, flagrant délit. Moreover, instead of starting from the crime to find the criminal, we should start from potential criminals, that is, tailing them, and end up with an arrest, caught in the act. Lille, we don't see any problem with that. Second idea, fewer procedures. This service at the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention, just a brief report once the job is done. And the Banditry Repression Brigade Services territorial brigades handle the execution of them. First, the interrogations of people in custody, those who have been arrested, and then the execution of interrogation commissions on paper. And so the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention works based on indicators because we can also talk about informants. They are informed about a gang of thugs who might be preparing for a big job, but we don't know what. Implementation of standard procedures, identification of the team, locating their residences, surveillance of the residences, phone tapping, etc. And after a while, realizing that if it's maybe not a robbery, then maybe it's a kidnapping. And then one day, in the Bois de Boulogne, the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention Agents see the Malaysian banker, who didn't know him, walking his dog. The criminals jump on him, put him in the trunk, the car. The Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention follows, discreetly of course, the criminal's car.
They're live.
They're live for the accident and kidnapping, arriving where the victim is held. Here, the Moyeu, I'm not sure where. They see the car enter a house over there, they position themselves outside, and they wait for the thugs to come out. Little by little, far away from this address, they catch the thugs. They wait because they're convinced there's someone bigger involved. A big criminal inside. If it's not the ones guarding the Malaysian banker, they go in and find the Malaysian banker. You have the beautiful photo. A few hours later, I forgot to tell you, the reaction of the Malaysian banker, it was something else.
That means they waited for the criminals to come out little by little so they could arrest them one by one outside.
It was a long wait, fabulous.
And then, to avoid raising the alarm and having them kill the hostage, there was also the risk of seeing him killed, you know.
They had to arrest them discreetly, that's one thing.
Exactly an anecdote.
If you want, A few weeks earlier, we were coming back from fasting at a small restaurant in the neighborhood. With Broussard, we were a few colleagues. And on the landing of the second floor of the management, there's a deputy director, a white guy, who calls out to Broussard saying, "Mr. Broussard, it's been a while since we've had any cases from the Brigade de Recherche et d'Intervention. What are you doing?" Some people tended to call this squad the luxury squad. Do you remember? And Broussard saying to the director, "Mr. Director, if we succeed in this case, I can assure you that it will justify its existence. For 2 or 3 years, we would only work on one case for 3 years." And that's exactly what happened. But you have to put this case in the context of the kidnappings of the years 75 to 80, when we had Todorov, Hazan, about whom we wrote a book.
So, just maybe a word, but Italy had exported a criminal behavior pattern which was kidnapping for ransom. It started over there and it came to France. In other words, the French thugs, the French gangsters said to themselves, well, that's a good method to make a lot of money. So they would select victims who had money, whose families had money. They would kidnap them and they would demand the money. And now I'll let Claude talk about it, because Pierre Ottavioli, a commissioner who was the head of the Crenel Brigade, changed the game.
So, to finish with Italy, the ransoms were often paid by a family without the police knowing, and half the time a body was found. Pierre Ottavioli, from the very first incident, mentioned to his administrative superiors, meaning the Minister of the Interior, and to the judicial authorities, the prosecutor, what was happening in Italy. And he said, yes, as Charlie said, they are exporting their profession as French envoys. If we give in, we will end up in the same situation as the Italians, that's it. And so he had the pleasure, but I can tell you that he didn't have anything written down.
The idea was to forbid handing over the ransom without the police knowing. In other words, every time the families had to agree to cooperate with us, we were the ones delivering the ransom. We would capture some of the kidnappers who would then lead us to the hostage and the other kidnappers. And this method,
And the last case?
It has great success. You didn't have the right
Actually, to give the ransom directly. What?
And the last case, which was the most well-known, the Rampin case, Baron Rampin.
We're in Paris on January 23, 1978, Avenue Foch. It's around 8:30 in the morning. Baron Edouard Jean Rampin leaves his home. He's the chief executive officer of the Rampin Schneider Group, 41 years old. And he's one of the richest men in Europe, with more than 150,000 employees, 300 companies, and billions of francs. Suddenly, a van blocks his car. Men spray him with gas, throw him inside. His driver is tied up and released. A few minutes later, the Baron, however, disappears. Political motives, terrorism. France had just witnessed the kidnapping of Schleyer in Germany by the Red Army faction. But 2 days later, a letter arrives. Ransom, 80 million francs. And to prove they're not joking, the kidnappers send a necklace to his wife. The Baron's little finger, 63 days of captivity in a cellar in Savigny-sur-Orge. Chained, tortured, starved, the investigation stalls. Worse, it reveals the Baron's hidden side, massive gambling debts, a mistress. So did he organize his own kidnapping? But then, how did he get out of it?
What was really extraordinary was that with the first message we received from the kidnappers, which was addressed to the people in the group, to Baron Rampin's associates it said, go to such and such a locker at Gare de Lyon, you will find a message from Baron Rampin. There was a message from Baron Rampin in which he said, above all, don't inform the police, deliver the ransom, I'm in a situation. And with this message in a small vial, there was the little left pinky finger of Baron Rampin. I can assure you that when my colleagues arrived at Gare de Lyon with that little vial, before we had it analyzed, we understood that it wasn't a joke. But we thought, my God, with the first message, what are we going to receive next? After all that, at the end of the negotiation, after some time, we would have received, well, at that moment we wondered what was going to happen. It's a scene I'll never forget. In Ottavioli's office, Broussard and some people from Acrib and I were present. They hold the vial between their thumb and index finger. We were all hanging on every word. Charlie said to me, we won't shoot. He was a quiet man, the boss. He didn't speak unless it mattered. He looks at us and says, we won't give in. And we didn't give in. Intervention during the operation to restore order on the Southern Highway. A criminal killed, you see that, the rifles at the ready. 2 brigades de recherche et d'intervention inspecteurs slightly injured. Fortunately, since that time,
we captured one of the most important criminals. They interrogate him at the Quai des Orfèvres. Pierre Ottavioli, the boss, tells him, it's simple. They might kill the Baron, but you're the one who will get your head cut off.
That's the official term back then.
On the other hand, if they let him go alive, your sentence will be much lighter and they might have a chance. And he ratted out.
And Alain Cailleul?
He called his accomplices to tell them, let him go.
It's war, let him go, it's war. And why? He was worried, Alain Cailleul, because Bertrand Cheny, the one who was guarding the emperor, wasn't very bright, not very... And one of his troublesome colleagues had been killed. What Alain Cailleul feared was that he would kill the Baron Emperor. And now I'll tell you something. Alain Cailleul got out after 20 years. He went to Pradels, I think, who was a European at that time.
For those who haven't been following, who is Alain then? For those who haven't been following Alain Cailleul?
He was the of the group.
Organizer of Phil?
Originally from Montpellier. You'll see what happens next. He goes to Pradel and Pradel says to him, I'd like to hear Commissioner Kansis on the phone. He says, okay, but I'd like to see him first. Pradel calls me and says, what do you think? I say, no problem, I'm interested in seeing a thug. We have a drink at the Lutetien. I don't know why, the Lutetien. And that night he wanted me to avoid mentioning the name of one of his accomplices who hadn't really come up in the proceedings. I had no reason to mention him, but I took the opportunity, looking him straight in the eyes, to tell him he was from Montpellier. I was from Montpellier, he had studied. Yes, a degree from a bourgeois family. I don't know if you ever experienced that, you're too young. The library is on Quai Street, not far from Montparnasse. I told him, Coma, you and your brother, with Valerie, the parents you had, you studied and you ended up in major crime. And he tells me it's because of a lack of affection. So I say to him, are you kidding me? He says to me, no, not at all. Our parents, we took whatever we wanted, they didn't take care of us. And one day we ran into a group of kids who were stealing cars. That's how it started. And him, a black cat. The roots of evil in our society are education and parental upbringing. We're right in the middle of it, you know, the young people messing around with terrorism, regular crime in the suburbs. They reach 18 years old and they've only known the suburbs, only drug trafficking, and they can't read or write. And then there you go with cryptocurrency. ABRI and ABRB, they've really worked the cryptocurrency business. That's all it takes. They took a bit of inspiration from the Marin-Pen enemies, small ones, but they reacted well. They made arrests in the act. About ideas too, I can tell you I'd be surprised if we ever hear about Le Money again. That's the fabulous, how should I say, mission of the J36 that makes it so amazing.
We were talking earlier about François Lemuel, the creator of the Research and Intervention Brigade, l'Abri, and Pierre Ottavioli. He is the inventor of this procedure in kidnapping cases, who, in my opinion, and in both of our opinions, prevented the expansion of the FES. You know, it's not easy because I worked a lot on the kidnapping of little Peugeot in the 60s. And the family wanted to pay without the police knowing. And imagine if the boy hadn't been returned alive. Can you imagine what a disaster? And so with Ottavioli's system, it was tough because it put pressure on the police. The risk of failure, that's it. And actually, it has already happened that there was, as a result, that kind of failure. No, we haven't had a case where the victim was killed and the ransom was paid, or before the ransom was paid. There was a terrible case, the case of Troyes, the case of Patrick Henry.
There was a case in the provinces, the notary's son, Chen. The family paid the ransom. Not only was the ransom paid, but the body was never found, and I am the chief of the barrier. In '84, we took on a kidnapping case about Sorel, the general manager of the small painting company. The gendarmes were in charge at first. I don't know why the prosecutor got involved. At one point, the kidnappers claimed to be from Action Directe, so it became Action Directe, then 36, the Criminal Division, and so on. When I arrive on the scene with the head of the Criminal Division, we go to see the father of the kidnapped person, who was the patriarch, who was retired. And he explained to us that the gendarmes who had started the investigation told him he had to pay the ransom and that they would intervene afterwards. Out of Christian charity, I won't tell you who was in charge of the gendarmerie. I immediately told the patriarch, you have to trust us, because our crime division in Berry has known about these things for years. The cases in Saint Laurent all ended well, were properly solved, the victims were found, and the ransoms were either not paid or quickly recovered. There was only one case that went wrong in the province. He told me, yes, the HL case, we knew about it, write it down. We got along and he trusted us, and we intervened at the moment the ransom was being handed over to arrest the thugs who were in the trunk of the car with a shovel and pickaxe ready to go bury the guy who was kidnapped. Why? Because among the gang of thugs, there was a former employee of the company who had gotten too old for the job. They were going to kill him, so they had no choice. In fact, we saved him, which means that now, today, we're making progress.
In the end, they returned him alive?
By the way, sorry.
They returned him alive?
So?
The one who was kidnapped?
Yes, we came back right away. We caught the thug and we said he's at this place.
That's it. Nowadays, these kidnapping cases are becoming more complicated for the thugs. Because at some point, they have to get in touch with the family of the victim, the kidnapped person. And in the past, this contact could be made without the police knowing. But today, with remote wiretapping, with cell phone geolocation, with all the tools we have, especially video surveillance, there is almost no chance for anyone to slip through the police net.
I'm changing the subject completely.
But I absolutely wanted to talk about the Cannibal of Paris. It's something you talk about too, I think. Yes, it really made a big impression on French public opinion. A lot. Because it's a case, it's sad. More than horrible, it's sad.
Really? To introduce it to you, he went to his friend's place to help him record German poems. He is a Japanese student who is very important to law and justice. Let me introduce him to you. You'll see. Quickly, he takes advantage of her, then he cuts up her body and eats it in this video. And I'm going to... A suitcase in the Bois de Boulogne contains a young woman's dismembered body. He is arrested, but what he reveals to investigators is shocking.
Sad, because here is a young man, a student Japanese living in Paris, who is, in quotes, taken by love for a beautiful woman.
Who is very intelligent.
Who is very intelligent.
Very cultured, as ugly as she is.
Is ugly, who is short and ugly, okay, but who is intelligent and who falls in love for a beautiful girl, a beautiful Dutch girl.
She is attracted by the personality, yes.
And his intelligence, she's attracted to him too, by his intelligence, but not by his looks. She doesn't want anything other than his friendship. Ah, okay. And he invites her one day to come to his place. And there, while he is recording, they are speaking in a foreign language, doing some revisions. They are both students. He is recording, and all of a sudden we hear him, he kills her, and then he goes on to cut parts of her body. And there...
He saw her before?
He killed her with what? With a firearm? A firearm? Okay, yes, we hear the noise and the body falling.
It was recording.
There you go. And then he cuts pieces of her body, puts them in his fridge, and eats them. And then he's arrested because he makes a mistake. He's not a thug or anything. He's, let's say, a poor guy, because to do something so horrifying. He takes the body, goes downstairs from his place, grabs a shopping cart, puts the body in the cart, then goes for a walk. He takes a taxi with the cart, walks around, and then goes to dump the body in the Bois de Boulogne.
Before that, they were stopped by a police officer because the cart was sticking out and the taxi driver had to put the... So, there are regulations. The police officer says to the taxi driver and the customer, Where are you going? What are you doing? Where did you get this cart? You need to return the cart to its place. And this time the taxi driver takes it back and then goes home. The next day he does it again, but this time he goes to the Bois de Boulogne to throw away the suitcase with the remains of the body. Because part of the body was in the fridge, since he had started eating pieces of flesh with peas. And there are passers-by who are intrigued, who see him, this guy. It raises suspicions. Those passers-by were questioned, found quickly, but in the Japanese men's building on Erlanger Street, that's right, Erlanger Street, there was a blind man who lived with his wife, and who, in the middle of the night, is awakened by something, who had a keen ear and said to his wife that something was happening. And his wife saw the Japanese man go out in the middle of the night with a suitcase, that's it. Lacrine is broadcasting to ask if a taxi picked him up. At that address, someone to drive her, whether in good or bad condition. The taxi was found, and that's how we got there.
So this case is going to have a lot of terrible consequences. First, we're going to consider him insane, so he'll be placed in a psychiatric hospital and appear before a criminal court, okay? And then his father, a rich Japanese man,
A prominent figure in Japan,
will manage to have his son transferred to a psychiatric hospital in Japan. Yes, nothing forbids it. From the moment the French justice system considers that the case has been closed under these conditions, there is no problem.
It was still proven that he was the one who committed the murder.
Oh yes, but he confessed to everything.
yes, he confessed.
I saw him. It was the group that was right in front of my door handling the case, and he was sitting there on the bench with his handcuffs, and then he was smiling, but with a smile.
He had put on a sardonic grin,
Strange.
rehabilitation and all that.
He told everything, then we found him with the gang. We heard the crime live, and he was recognized by the taxi driver. He was recognized by everyone. No, he has no problem. He passes for crazy. His father arranged for him to be transferred to Japan, over there in a psychiatric hospital for a few months.
Someone calls me back and then,
Released, and then he becomes famous. Over there, he writes poetry.
television shows.
Television shows where he talks about what he did, as if it was something surreal but almost poetic. Love. He knows a celebrity for several years, but it's incredible. And there's another detail in this case, which is that the press is completely fascinated by this affair. And unfortunately, someone who works in the forensic identification department sells the photographs where you can see the cut-up pieces in the fridge. And it's published by a magazine of the time, and it causes a scandal. So, you see, there are a lot of things to say about this case.
There's the place of the parents, the little girl. So just to finish, it's that after this period of fame, In the meantime, he was seen by a French journalist, to whom he said that he still had urges and still wanted to get himself a pretty white girl. A pretty white girl. Can you believe that? Over the years, he ended up like a homeless man, and he died 3 or 4 years ago.
I still have 2 last little cases that I find extremely relevant. If you agree, of course, it's especially what you call the old lady killer, Thierry Paulin.
The Old Lady Killer, Paris, October 1984, 18th District. In 1 month, 8 old ladies are found dead in their homes, strangled, suffocated, tortured, some forced to swallow caustic soda. Apartments ransacked, jewelry, savings, valuables, everything is gone. Terror sets in. Elderly women no longer dare to open their doors. The 18th District is under siege. November 87. A survivor gives his description. Tall, mixed race, about 1.80 meters, bleached blonde hair with an earring on the left. How was he found? What did he take? And what was his real modus operandi?
So, if you want, during those years in the crime unit, there were 2 killers. There was Guy Georges, serial killer, one, but that was later. And in the 1980s, we had the killer or killers, because there were 2 of them. with Thierry Paulin, there was another one, an accomplice. They would go, especially in the north of Paris, and follow old ladies. And at the last moment, she was pushed inside and beaten, massacred, and they would steal from her everything she might have had.
Inside their own apartment?
From their apartment, yes. And both of them were on drugs, both of them needed money. And with the money they managed to steal, they would party.
Do you realize that these two cases, if at that time the criminal investigators had had the technical means they later acquired? I'm thinking especially of DNA and databases. Thierry Paulin had been arrested in Val-de-Marne and in Toulouse for cases of, in Toulouse for burglary cases. He was on file, his fingerprints were there, but nothing was centralized.
Because at that time in Paris, there was centralization for Paris and the suburbs. And then for the rest of France, it was by region. So if you had a fingerprint, it had to go all around France. That's what happened. Even though we had a fingerprint we never knew, whereas if we had had an automated file of fingerprints. In those years, in the early to mid-1980s, Paulin would have been arrested and maybe before committing other crimes.
And the same for
Guy Georges is the one we were talking about, who was a killer of women mainly, and for him it's the same. He attacked them and we had DNA, but we needed a comparison.
But there was no database.
There was no database for...
So that people understand clearly. Basically, you had the fingerprints, but you didn't know exactly who they belonged to.
Thierry Paulin died in prison from acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, so he had a rather dissolute life in every respect.
the men made him drink dishwashing liquid when he made mistakes.
Because it was both crimes and torture at the same time, and it was absurd.
He was recreating it in a Parisian cabaret.
How did you find him and make the connection?
Well, his appearance, he had a very, very distinctive look, wild hair, a certain style. And so the police made a composite sketch, so the crime unit had a composite sketch made. You know, a composite sketch is what we call using the witness's memory to create an image. So we try to get them to not only give the shapes, but also the feeling you get when you look at him. And they managed to make a composite sketch that works.
It's based on witnesses.
Yes, with testimonies, yes, people who had seen him leave and a victim, if I may say so.
At the time, I was chief of staff, and the head of forensic identification called me and said, we have a robot that's pretty good. So I go to see our director, his life, and I told him we're going to do a broadcast, a standard broadcast. And yes, that means it goes out, but it will arrive tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, in the files, etc. He tells me you should handle it yourself. To distribute the composite sketch, yes, in all the police stations in Paris, because we did a broadcast. In the evening, all the heads of the Parisian police departments had the composite sketch on their desks. Unfortunately, because it was in their interest. It's a colleague whose name was, and still is, Jacob. We brought the sketch. He leaves his police station, and 100 meters from the station, he comes across the guy. He says, "For God's sake, sir, please, I'm with the police. Can I see your papers?" "Yes, why not?" "Can you come with me? I'm at the police station." He had stopped for a while. It was him by chance. That's how things work out. Yes, that's how it is. He would have arrived in the evening, and he didn't have an eye.
That's it, by chance. Yes, by chance. And so Mathurin, who committed the crimes with him, same thing, they were both arrested.
I'm not sure if you've already discussed this in the video. It's about the youngest, François Verov. Have you covered this scene yet?
No, François Verov, the pockmarked one, it's a sad story, same thing. He's a bad guy who hid the reality of his personality for many, many years. He was a gendarme, he was a police officer, a gendarme, a motorcycle officer, then a police officer. He would actually end his police career in the south of France and even become a municipal councillor. So, someone who seemed to be a good family man with no history and a respectable professional background.
Grillé, François Vérove, Paris, 1980s to 1990s. An 11-year-old girl strangled in a basement, another 8 years old kidnapped, locked up for hours in an abandoned farm. Terrible murders, and not just for 35 years. The police are looking for a man with a completely pockmarked face, with acne scars, composite sketch, DNA, blood type, but nothing. They find nothing. The killer has disturbing knowledge. He shows a police badge. He gives a false address that matches a former prefecture office. He knows police jargon very well. In 2021, the investigating judge has a hunch. What if the killer was a gendarme? She summons 750 former gendarmes for DNA samples. So, how did they actually identify who it was, and were they among the 750 gendarmes who were summoned?
And behind it all was a monster. A guy who, starting in the 1980s, began killing little girls in apartment building basements. Lives, of course, and disappears. He kills a couple too, because there's a story that goes wrong and he disappears. And he also kidnaps a little girl, a young kid in the suburbs of Paris, who is riding her bike. He tells her, get in, and she gets in the car. She tells him, don't be afraid, I'm with law enforcement, you're not at risk. He's really with law enforcement. At that moment you can't, no, not at all, no. But what I mean is he was doing it for, well, it was a kidnapping really, disguised. He takes her to a farm, to a place completely isolated from everything. There, but he doesn't kill her. And so she's able to make a composite sketch as well. The DNA from the different cases is also connected. These cases are connected. We know that he is the perpetrator of several murders with Vio, and of this abduction with Vio, and of the murder of the couple I told you about. The problem is we run it. There's a genetic fingerprint database. We put it in and nothing comes up, nothing comes up. So at the time, the genetic fingerprint database had very, very few people in it. Each year it grew bigger. When you say nothing comes up, do you mean you can't find it? No, it just doesn't match. That means you ask the question, you give your comparison profile, and then the machine tells you, well, I don't have anyone who matches that, okay? For years and years, the criminal brigade worked on this case for years.
We just lost another colleague 15 days ago, Pascal Lenny.
Bernard Pascal Lenny.
And that lasted until the end of his life. He had this case on his mind. He left the criminal division afterwards. He worked in other departments, but this is a case that followed him. All of that really, it's something after that. He was just that kind of cop.
And so this case is still unsolved after more than 20 years, all right? And there's a magistrate working on it, a new investigating judge, so hats off to her, she's working on it. Then she still says, it's strange, he says to one of the girls, the young girls, he says, I'm part of the police force. And then the isolated farm where he is, it's right next to a center, a gendarmerie school. It's still strange. So what we're going to do, what you are going to do, gentlemen police officers, is collect genetic fingerprints from all the people in the gendarmerie who at the time were working in Paris. So they had to be found because more than 30 years had passed. So there's a list and we send this list to the different regions of France where a certain number of them who are retired are living. And there's one who ends up in the south of France. And the young woman there, a police officer, contacts a former gendarme, François Vérove, who had become, as we said, a police officer. Later on, she tells him, it would be good if you could come by so we can take your genetic fingerprint. Yes, listen, it's the beginning of September, at the end of the month. All right, okay, I'll be there, I'm coming. But at that moment, it was him, the killer. What is he doing? He has three choices. There are some. He is discovered and he is sent to prison. And then he becomes the most abject being in all of France. Second option, he runs away, but with what? I mean, a retired man with no fortune and all, he wouldn't last a week. You know, living underground is very expensive, very expensive. And third, then, he goes into an apartment far from his family. And there he writes a letter to his wife where he tells her, in the 1980s, I did some absolutely horrible, horrible things. That's it. I can't, well, it has to stop with me now. And so he takes medication, alcohol. When the body is discovered, they take his DNA, they compare it. And it really was the pockmarked, because they had given him that nickname, pockmarked, because the skin on his face was a little damaged. And so that's where the nickname comes from. The composite sketch we included in the book, where you can see him, is of a man with a slightly pockmarked face.
Was there also something about a tire mark, or am I mixing it up with another case he discusses?
No, there were a lot of elements in this case. And in particular, for example, there were points where they questioned things. When they killed the couple right there, they started questioning things. Because the bad luck was that she had an address book that had disappeared and he was probably in it. Yes. So if you want, there are some elements. And regarding the tire tracks, it's probably when he actually kidnapped the young girl in the outer suburbs. And, you know, in the criminal police, we try, that's where Claude, he's one of those who taught me the job. But the idea is to close all the doors. As soon as you have any traces, any clues that can lead you somewhere, you have to follow them all the way. Okay, sometimes it leads nowhere, or sometimes it does, and sometimes, because, you know, there was a god in our line of work who is very important, it's the god of luck. It's, you know, how many cases we solve thanks to luck, and other times you think it's going to be easy and bad luck plays tricks on you and it doesn't work out.
There's also a golden rule, which is that before being a police officer, we're men. You can't help but build hypotheses at a crime scene. Above all, you have to chase them out of your mind and follow the thread. And how many colleagues have gotten it wrong by favoring, we're building from hypothesis C?
First, you have to look at what you have. Specifically,
you have to do the...
Never have prejudices, never say no, that will lead you down the wrong path.
Very well, thank you so much, Charles and Claude. You recently wrote a book for those who may not have been following from the beginning. History of the 36th Quai des Orfèvres Illustrated. So what is it about? Basically, you go back over the cases, you revisit the history.
We tell the story of the 36th Quai des Orfèvres, the headquarters of the Parisian Judicial Police, from its beginnings up to today.
We go all the way to the Bastion.
All the way to the Bastion, the 36th Bastion, where the Judicial Police are now located. And there we talk especially about the fight against cybercrime. Because nowadays, you know, back in the day, criminals used to attack you on the roads. They used to attack you on the roads, in the forest, on the highways. And now they attack you on the net, and with one click, they empty your bank account. And so we met the specialists from this cybercrime unit, and they were fascinating. And so we tell their story.
We also discuss cases from the past 5 years.
A bit of death, yes, that's right, and especially the Grelais case. The investigation into the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Yes.
It's the criminal investigation that's worrying.
We go back over all of that, and in doing so, what we want is to try to make the reader understand the difficulties of our work, all the demands it has, and the way the investigations are conducted. So there you go. It's not at all a hymn to the judicial police. But that's how we experienced it, and that's how we want to share it.
Very well, very good conclusion.
Exceptional. Listen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for participating, StoryCube. Let me remind you that if you also want to take part in a future episode, I remind you that on StoryCube, we bring in a lot of testimonies as well.
You have an email showing up right here to send us a recap of what you experienced. We'll be happy to have you on the show. With that, this was Noah. Have a great evening. Thank you again.
Bye.